My name is Pak-Hang Wong. I'm a researcher at the Research Group for Ethics in IT at the Department of Informatics at the University of Hamburg. My talk, Artificial Intelligence, Personal Decisions, Consent, and the Confucian Idea of Oneness, will explore the changing moral nature of personal decisions. I'll also look at the Confucian idea of oneness and to see how this idea of oneness can help us to better understand the changing moral nature of personal decisions in the context of artificial intelligence. In this talk, in the interest of time, I'm not going to explore these questions related to consent, but nonetheless, I think the discussions about oneness, about changing nature of personal decisions, can also help us to understand the changing nature of consent in the context of artificial intelligence as well. So this talk is going to focus on personal decisions, but nonetheless, the argument should apply to this concept or this idea of consent as well. In this talk, the main argument is that there is an expansion of responsibilities for our everyday actions such as personal decisions and consent. In particular, I want to argue that when we think about personal decisions, it used to be the responsibility used to be just about oneself. And in the context of artificial intelligence systems, I argue that this responsibility expands not just to oneself, but also to others as well. In other words, when we think about personal decision, it is no longer just about a self-regarding actions, but rather it is also other-regarding as well. And this happens in the context of artificial intelligence systems. To explain this idea of expansion of responsibilities, I want to introduce an imaginary scenarios. Imagine we have this person Jack who just lost his job and is desperate to look for a new job. And to do so, he goes on to this freejobmatching.com and to try to find job from that particular job matching website. In using that particular website, he provides his personal information such as nationalities, age, gender, address, education, periods, work experience to the site. At the same time, he searched for and viewed jobs on the site. Unfortunately, as a rather unconfident person and as a person who is desperate for a job, he only searched for jobs that he thinks he have a large probability to get them. So he just looked for junior and intermediate positions, despite his college education and previous work experience. Eventually, he has been matched with unskilled and low salary job. And that because he is indeed in need of a job, he take up those opportunities or those matches. At the end, the platform classified Jack as a low potential applicant. And this is how this matching system works. That the system take on the personal informations, takes on the interactions, the person's interactions with the platform, and then to classify them as a particular type of applicant and base the matching upon these classifications. All good for Jack, but not so good for Bob. Bob has much similarity with Jack in terms of nationality, age, gender, address, education, and previous work experience. And it is precisely the similarity between Bob and Jack in all these dimensions, in all these features, that the platform also classified Bob as a low potential applicant and therefore only match him with other low salaries or unskilled job. In that scenarios, we can ask the questions whether Bob has been wronged by Jack by his personal decisions of providing information for searching this type of job and have this type of interactions with the platform. My argument is that Jack indeed, in some sense, wronged Bob. In the sense that his personal decisions actually have direct implications to Bob's eventual state of affairs. So it is in this background, I argue that personal decisions in our case, and also if you want to read on more on that, consent acquire new moral significance as a result of the use and pervasiveness of artificial intelligence systems. So why is personal decisions particularly interesting? Personal decision is particularly interesting because it is a kind of holy grail of behavior that we should consider, or we consider as something that should not be interfered with others. It is only about oneself. So the idea is personal decisions should be respected, should be accepted, and therefore should not be interfered with unless there are overriding moral reasons. The reason why personal decisions should not be interfered with is because of two features, I think, of personal decisions. First, personal decisions are ideally autonomous choices. They are intentional and well-informed decisions made by a person without controlling influence from other individuals or external factors. In other words, it is a representation or it is an expression of one's autonomies of them to make a particular choices for themselves. It is also self-regarding. Therefore, they do not directly affect anyone but the decision maker themselves. To explain further why personal decisions should not be interfered with, it is because of a particular liberal views of autonomy that see autonomy has intrinsic values, and that personal decisions indeed are such expressions of autonomies. And then we would think that it will be morally wrong for us to dismiss or disrespect other personal decisions unless these decisions also directly affect the well-being of others. This is typified by Mill's harm principles, that we can only stop others from acting, we can only deter others from acting if their actions harms others as well. More importantly, liberalism actually asserts individuals have right to pursue their own end. In that sense, then, personal decision is necessary, otherwise they will not be able to pursue their own ends. It will be others' ends if our personal decisions have not been respected and have not been accepted by others. A stronger version would even argue for a person would have a right to do wrong. So in that case, even if personal decisions are wrong, it's not ideal for that particular person, they still have right to do that. We still do not have the authority to stop them from making such choice, to interfere with their decisions. So in that sense, then we can think of personal decisions, what kind of moral obligations we have with personal decisions. Within personal decisions, we are only required to consider our own values and interests in making those decisions, insofar as we assume those responsibility for the outcome ourselves, as well as such decisions are not harming in other individuals. The problem with that is we have a new background conditions that I call the interconnectedness conditions. The interconnectedness conditions state that we are being more seamlessly and tightly connected with one another, both offline and online, with the increased applications of AI system in various areas of our life. I argue that such interconnectedness conditions can be understood in two ways. First, the technical understanding. The technical understanding refers to this idea of the minimum requirements for a technology to operate as it intended, or the overall impact of such technologies. So technical understanding refers basically to large technical systems, social technical systems, that they have to be applied virally for them to perform and realize their intended functions. But then when those systems are successfully implemented, most individuals in the societies will become their user or will be directly affected by them. So one example would be transportation system. It cannot be function properly, or it cannot perform their intended functions if it is only realized, it is only implemented rather partially. So in order for a transportation system to work, we'll already have this system adopted by a great number of people, a great number of cities in order for it to perform its transportation functions. So in other words, in order for this type of system to work, it will have to be adopted by a great number of people. And in that case, then most people in that particular, implemented area will be affected by the systems already. So the case for AI is that it is such type of system that need to be implemented virally in order for it to work. We can say that an AI system requires a collection of large number of data in order for it to make good predictions or good classifications. And more importantly, it needs continuously input of data in order for the system to, maintain itself, to make better predictions by correcting mistakes that it have made previously. Also important is that once the system is in place, then the system only requires a small amount of data or information about a person to predict the behavior, the decisions of that particular persons. So in other words, as long as we put a little bit of information online with the system or to the system, then the system will be able to predict our actions, or at least it will try to predict our actions insofar as we have provided that system a little bit of information. A case in point is this ideal, this visions of selfish ledgers proposed by Google's a few years ago. So this would have significant implications to personal decision insofar as our actions to provide information through the AI systems then would have significant implications to others who would also be predict or would also be able to be predicted by the system itself. So in other words, in that case, our personal decisions are no longer just personal decisions, but rather it become a kind of decisions that at the same time affect the other as well. There is another understanding of interconnectedness conditions I call the ontological understanding, because AI systems are re-ontologizing technologies, to use Luciano Floridi's work. It is a radical form of re-engineering, one that not only design, construct, or structure a system, but fundamentally transform its intrinsic nature, that is, in its ontologies. One way to understand that is that AI systems engage primarily not individuals, but the categories formed by data points the individuals left behind. So in other words, in our imaginary scenario, it interacts with low potential applicants, that particular category, but not the individuals themselves. In other words, it interacts not with personal decisions, but rather it interacts with the decisions made by a person, but nonetheless aggregate at a level of categories. It interacts with the decision of that particular categories, if you will. So that interconnectedness conditions lead to a variety of new challenges. For example, we can think of the discussions about group privacy. It is precisely AI systems classify individuals into ad hoc groups such as low potential applicants. and make decisions based on those ad hoc groups that they belong to. And that such membership of ad hoc groups can reveal private and intimate information about the members and may at the end affect the membership or members through the memberships of the ad hoc group. While these discussions about group privacy is interesting and important, I think it fails to reconsider the nature of some of our actions, such as the nature of personal decision making, against the background of interconnectedness. It is still about interference of individuals' autonomies or harm that arise from that, even though it is through the formations or membership of an ad hoc group. The case of group privacy and the imaginary scenario in the very beginning demonstrate individuals' decisions to affect others, to directly affect others for that matters. So personal decisions cannot be viewed as self-regarding once we actually take seriously the interconnectedness conditions, and that we should think of it as other regarding as well. So in other words, with respect to the background of AI systems, there is a shift of the nature, of moral nature of personal decisions. It is no longer just personal decisions. It will always be personal group decisions. And I want to argue that there will be new responsibilities accompanied with that particular transformations. Roughly, in other words, we need to consider others' interests when making such decisions. It might be difficult for us to understand such new responsibilities because we stick to this liberal idea that autonomy is the fundamental, the holy grails of our moral system, so to speak, that we should not be interfered with for our own personal decisions. So perhaps if we look into all the value system, it might help us to better understand why it would be problematic to just think of our personal decisions not affecting the others. One way to think of that is through new Confucianisms. So Western inscription is one of those texts that try to promote this idea of oneness. That he tried to argue or try to propose this idea of a person is the same substance as the universe, and which state that which feel the universe, I feel the universe, I regard as my body, and that which direct the universe I consider as my nature. All people are my brothers and sisters, and all things are my companions. It is a fundamental metaphysical claim that in Western inscriptions is trying to make. This is, like I said, a metaphysical claims about the nature of the relations of human and nature as well as others as well. It is a one body. It is a one body hypothesis that we are made of the same substance. We are interrelated. If we take that claim seriously, then we would need to argue that decisions that are harmful for others will actually be harmful for oneself as well. So, if we take seriously this idea of oneness, one has to be mindful for their interconnections with the universe and other beings in their decisions and actions, even if the decision and actions are seemingly only directed at themselves. Of course, this idea is not just ancient idea from Neo-Confucianism. More recently, philosophers P.J. Ivanhoe have defended the same view via the idea of oneness hypothesis. In fact, we can argue more proactively the idea that oneness calls for active promotion of the flourishing of others, people, creatures, things, and the universe as well. It will also be helpful to look at why oneness fails, or in other words, not oneness fail, but we fail to achieve oneness. One way to think of that is through this idea of self-centeredness. It is our self-centeredness and excessive and exclusive focus on oneself when we approach the world and other beings that make us difficult to achieve oneness. It is self-centeredness by prioritizing one's perspective over others' perspective that make oneness difficult, because as we prioritizing our will and center on it, it will draw a sharp boundary between oneself and others. So it makes it difficult for people to recognize and experience the interconnections with the world and other beings, and thereby also making it difficult for us to achieve oneness. It will be an interesting point of view for our design of technology, as we'll see later on. So if human beings are deeply connected, then this deep connection should motivate and oblige us to care for others and to improve others' well-beings. Because failure to do so is actually a form of self-harm and self-degradation. So personal decisions that do not account for others' values and interests become morally problematic. Just to summarize a bit of my claim is that Confucian oneness and the interconnectedness conditions for AI systems are very similar. They have the similar structures. So the arguments applied to the Confucian oneness conditions should also apply to interconnectedness conditions as well. So roughly then, individuals acquire user of AI systems ought to be mindful of the impact of their decisions and actions can have on others user as well as non-user. And the user failure to do so will be seen as a moral failing and as a form of self-harm and self-degradations. More proactively then, we are responsible for actively promoting the well-being of others, as well as we need to ensure their interactions with AI system will positively affect others, user and non-user as well. So we have a new responsibilities in making our personal decisions, not just consider our own well-beings or values and interests, but also the well-beings, values and interests of other user, other non-user as well, so long as we are connected by the AI systems. Before I end this discussions, perhaps it will be helpful to look at some objections as well. So is this new form of responsibility systemically over-demanding? Particularly, one might want to argue or raise the claim that it will be difficult for users to know the values and interests of others, and therefore, as well as the impacts of one's decisions and behaviors to others, and therefore this claim of responsibilities seems to be overtaxing. So I have two answers for that. The first answer is perhaps more pessimistic. We can accept there are epistemic limitations, but nonetheless we can shift the discussions about being responsible for others to not being irresponsible to others. This shift from being responsible to not being irresponsible shift the burden to oneself in the sense that when we have considered the values, when we try our best to consider the values and interests of others, then at least we cannot be blamed as not being irresponsible. So we are not trying actively to hinder, to hamper other well-beings, but we have tried our best to secure other well-beings. So it at least provides a kind of, excuses for not being blamed to not have considered other interests and values. More positively, we can claim that through technological design, we can alleviate some of the epistemic limitations. Recall the main obstacle is self-centeredness. So we can try to design a system in such a way that to put this self-centeredness away For example, we can try to visualize the harm or the consequence that our decisions could make to other users that are similar to us. So in that case, then at least we take away some of the self-centeredness through the technological design of the AI systems. And when one fails to take into considerations, even if we have those signals, those visualizations, then it is really the person's responsibilities not to have take them into considerations. So there are a lot of things we can still discuss, but I think this particular discussions have raised a new type of responsibilities to user of AI systems, to individuals of AI systems that we need to take into account. So with that said, I'm going to end this presentations and thank you for listening. If you have any questions and if you are interested to connect, please feel free to drop me an email or to connect me on social media such as Twitter. Thank you very much.